Susan Sue Taraskiewicz was one of 3 children and grew up in Saugus, Massachusetts. She was very creative, and as a teenager, she helped make Halloween costumes for the younger children in her family's neighborhood. After she graduated from Saugus High School, she developed her creative aspirations further through higher education, attending a local community college and then the Massachusetts College of Art. Sue had a dream of one day becoming a cartoonist. Knowing that an art career might not fully support her financially, she took a job with Northwest Airlines at Logan International Airport after graduating from college. She wanted to work on the ramp, but she had to start out at the airline in other positions. Sue began her career at Northwest, cleaning cabins and working the ticket counter, but quickly progressed with the company. Within 5 years, not only was she working on the ramp, but she was a ramp supervisor. Sue reported to work for her 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift on Saturday, September 12, 1992. Around 1 a.m. on September 13th, 27-year-old Sue left work to pick up some sandwiches for her and some of her coworkers. She never returned. None of her coworkers did anything when she failed to come back for the rest of her shift, which was something that she had never done before during her years with the company. When Sue wasn't home that Sunday morning, her parents assumed that she had gone straight to church. They left home for the day, and when they came back, they looked in Sue's room and saw clothes on the floor. They assumed that they had been left there recently, and that Sue had come home and then left for her next shift while they were out of the house. Sue's mother, Marlene, typically saw Sue coming home from her shifts as she was leaving to go to work, so she was slightly concerned when she left home at 8:30 a.m. on Monday the 14th without seeing her daughter. After Marlene arrived at work, she got a phone call from her other daughter, Debbie. Debbie had just gotten a phone call from someone at Northwest asking to speak with Sue. Sue had still not come home, even though she was due to go with Debbie to a fitting for her wedding dress. Later that day, Sue's car was found outside an auto body shop on Route 1A in the city of Revere, north of the airport. Sue's body was discovered in the trunk of the car. She had been severely beaten, as well as stabbed. Sue had loved the cartoon character Snoopy, and had a massive collection of Snoopy memorabilia. She had the opportunity to meet Snoopy's creator, Charles Schulz, 7 months before her murder. After her death, he drew a Snoopy for Sue that was put on her gravestone. Sue was a valuable employee and had advanced to a supervisor position with Northwest. Many of her coworkers appreciated how hard she worked and how far out of her way she would go to help her coworkers. However, her work life was far from perfect. Sue had to fight for her job and fight to keep it. She worked mainly with men and in a position traditionally held by a man. When she finally became a ground services employee, working on the ramp as she had hoped, she was only the second woman Northwest had given that position to at Logan International. She had to fight to finally be promoted to a supervisor position there, becoming the first woman to do so. She had initially been passed over for a supervisor position in favor of a less qualified male coworker who had illegally bid for the job. Sue was subjected to widespread sexual harassment and threats from a large group of her male coworkers while working in ground services. They left filthy messages about Sue and photographs of her throughout the airport and urinated on her locker. She received phone calls late at night, and a male coworker smashed her radio. Following her promotion, her locker was also vandalized with graffiti, an image of a casket with Sue's name on it. Sue kept a detailed diary of 8 months' worth of these incidents, although according to some of her coworkers, the harassment continued on well beyond the period Sue detailed in her diary. Sue filed reports with both her union and with Northwest, but the behavior continued on unchecked. Sue assumed that she was being targeted by her coworkers simply because they did not want to be working with or for a woman, and that the harassment was being carried out in hopes of getting her to quit her job. She was determined to not be forced out, despite the emotional toll that the harassment was taking on her. No one was going to take the job Sue had fought so hard for away from her. Sue's mother, Marlene, has come to believe that there was an entirely different motive for at least some of the later harassment, as well as for Sue's murder. Not long after Sue was killed, Several of her co-workers were arrested for being part of a credit card theft ring. The arrests were made as part of a federal investigation that had begun in the summer of 1992. Baggage handlers on the ramp were stealing new credit cards that arrived at the airport through mail deliveries on Northwest aircraft. They were then either using the cards themselves or selling them. The individuals involved in the ring ultimately stole more than $7 million from the various credit card companies. Sue was not involved in this illegal activity. However, the fact that she was a supervisor meant that she could make decisions that would make continuing the scheme more difficult. For example, if she made sure the employees she was supervising were always at their assigned worksite, they would not have time to sneak off to hide the stolen cards. There is no evidence that Sue was aware of the thefts, but if the individuals committing them thought that she was, they may have increased their efforts to harass her with the aim of getting her to quit, not just because she was a woman, but because she was a threat to their criminal activities. 3 out of the 10 employees who were ultimately sentenced in the case had been named by Sue in her diary as some of the co-workers who had been harassing her. While the incidents listed in the diary predate Sue's promotion, these men's motives for harassing Sue could have shifted over time. If the members of the theft ring became more convinced that Sue was onto them, keeping her from reporting their illegal activity could have been a potential motive in her murder. The Taraskiewicz family sued Northwest Airlines for sexual harassment following Sue's murder. 3 years after her death, Northwest settled with the family for $75,000. They also agreed to provide $250,000 as a reward for information that leads to the arrest of Sue's killer. While the airline no longer exists, the reward fund does. Sue's father and brother have passed away, leaving her mother Marlene and sister Debbie as the main champions for justice in her case. Sue now has 2 nieces and a nephew, who have been raised on stories of their Aunt Sue and assurances of how much she would have loved them. Marlene regularly gives interviews and has made 2 videos with the Massachusetts State Police to keep the case active in people's memory and to ask for witnesses to come forward. Even after almost 30 years of looking for answers, her dedication to her daughter's case has not wavered. "I am a very healthy woman, and I am not going away," she said in 2014. Speaking to her daughter's killer, she said, "You are going to look over your shoulder until the day that I go, but I will get you, and I will get justice for my Susan." "38-year-old Jonathan Aujay had Thursday, June 11, 1998, off from work. He was a deputy of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, a canine handler with the elite Special Enforcement Bureau. John planned to spend the majority of the day at Devil's Punch Bowl Natural Area, some 20 miles southeast of the home he shared with his wife Deborah and 5-year-old daughter Chloe in Palmdale, California. John was able to handle his prestigious but exceptionally challenging position because of his background as a paratrooper with the Army's Special Forces unit and his commitment to remaining in peak physical condition. He was a skilled runner who trained in rugged, remote locations and knew how to survive in the wilderness. He had just completed his 6th 50-mile ultramarathon a few days prior and was at the Punch Bowl to train for a 100-mile run he would be undertaking in just 2 weeks. Participating in the Western States 100-mile endurance run was a long-held dream of John's, and he had been training for it daily and organizing a support team to assist him for the over 20 hours he would spend running. The mountains south of the Devil's Punch Bowl were a regular training site for him, since he was familiar with them, and they helped prepare him for the difficult terrain he would be running over during the endurance run in Northern California. It is believed that Jonathan parked his truck and began his run around 11:45 a.m. Shortly after he began his run, he encountered a group of elementary school students. John and his canine partner, Bosco, had recently spoken to the class at their school, so he stopped to briefly speak with the teacher. He told the teacher that he would be running to the summit of Mount Baden-Powell, which was roughly 20 miles away, and back, returning to the parking lot around sundown. 2 park employees saw a man believed to be John in the park over the following several hours, and a third saw a man with a backpack like the one John had taken with him, walking towards the parking lot around 6 p.m. Jonathan did not return home as planned, however, and his wife called the Palmdale Sheriff's Station to report him missing at 11 p.m. 2 deputies found John's white Ford pickup truck still in the parking lot, and the search and rescue squad with the department was called in to look for John by 11:30. Multiple other organizations and agencies would join the effort the following morning. Even as the search for John went on for over a day, there was still hope that he would be found alive, because he was so well trained in outdoor survival and physically fit. However, as several more days went on with no sign of him, despite extensive aerial and ground searches, the optimism began to wane. 6 days after John went missing, the sergeant leading the search announced to the search teams that it was believed that John had committed suicide. While the official search ended, friends of John's and members of law enforcement continued looking for him on their own. The closest thing to physical evidence that John took his own life was the fact that his off-duty firearm, which he did not normally take with him on runs, was unaccounted for. A local resident had also reported hearing what they believed to be a gunshot in the early evening hours of June 11th. The suicide theory was best supported by John's mental state at the time of his disappearance. John had been going through a difficult time. His marriage was falling apart, and he and Deborah had gone to their first joint therapy session the day before he vanished. On the morning of June 11th, he had told Deborah to have a nice life and tell Chloe that he loved her before he left to drive out to the site for his run. At the time, Deborah thought that these statements indicated that he was through with their marriage, although she realized that they could have indicated that he was suicidal after he failed to return home. Most of John's loved ones do not believe that he would have taken his own life, however. Most importantly, he was dedicated to his daughter Chloe. He was also excited about a new romantic relationship he was pursuing. John was tired of living in Southern California and had been looking into moving to a remote part of Alaska, where he would be surrounded by few people and many opportunities for outdoor activities. John's sister believes he may have staged his disappearance and left for Alaska under a new name. One of the other reasons John had wanted to leave California was the explosion of crime in the more rural areas of the Antelope Valley. 6 violent drug rings were producing massive amounts of methamphetamine in the area. These drug rings, and the investigation into them by the authorities, would prove to have numerous uncorroborated connections to John's disappearance. Within the first week of John going missing, 2 individuals with ties to biker gangs producing meth in the area told authorities that John had come across a meth lab that was operating underground, near the area where he had last been heading during his run. In their words, John was then taken care of. By early 2000, 9 more individuals connected to the meth trade had provided the same story. Some of them also reported that the resident deputy assigned to the area that included Devil's Punch Bowl Natural Area had been involved in John's disappearance. A Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputy being involved with criminal activity was not inconceivable. 35 deputies from the department had been indicted for stealing millions of dollars from drug dealers in the early 1990s. Other deputies were arrested for unrelated crimes, and the FBI had video evidence of other criminal activity committed by deputies. The sheriff at the time had asked the FBI for assistance in removing the corrupt deputies from his department, but he passed away in 1998. By that time, rumors were circulating that deputies were working with the drug rings, warning them in advance of any planned raids. Homicide detective Larry Brandenburg learned of John's potential murder and the alleged involvement of the resident deputy in December of 1999. He found a location near Devil's Punch Bowl that could have been the site of the underground meth lab the informants had described, and collected evidence that seemingly corroborated some of their statements. Based on these findings, he applied for a search warrant to examine the phone and financial records of the local resident deputy to see if his involvement in the case could be corroborated. The district attorney signed off on the warrant, but when Brandenburg took the paperwork to his boss for his signature, not only did he refuse to sign it, but he ultimately took Brandenburg off the case when he tried to pursue it further. During his investigation, Detective Brandenburg had asked Deputy Darren Hager to speak with one of his informants about the resident deputy's possible involvement with drug rings. The informant claimed that the resident deputy was involved with drug trafficking and potentially John's disappearance. When Hager reported this information to his superiors, he was told not to investigate any wrongdoing by other deputies or John's disappearance. Information about the former was to go to Internal Affairs, and information about the latter should be sent to Detective Brandenburg. In March of 2000, Hager had been assigned to a joint task force with the Drug Enforcement Agency. Operation Silent Thunder, as it was called, spent almost a year infiltrating local drug rings, setting up wiretaps, and obtaining informants. The operation resulted in the arrests of hundreds of people who were prosecuted by the state of California, 32 federal convictions, and 5 out of the 6 area kingpins going to prison. In 2002, Hager traveled to Washington, D.C. to be presented with the DEA's Administrator's Award in honor of his work on the operation. During the course of the operation, Hager had witnessed specific incidents of deputy misconduct and learned of specific connections the resident deputy alleged to be involved in John's disappearance may have had to a local drug dealer. He also had 3 new witnesses provide information about John's disappearance. One of them claimed to have witnessed his murder, one claimed to know where his body was buried, and the third said that he had heard screaming after he saw John walk in the direction of 2 armed bikers the day he went missing. As instructed, Hager passed all of this information on to other departments. The homicide captain, who had previously refused to sign off on Detective Brandenburg's application for a search warrant, refused to meet with members of the task force to discuss the new leads, or assign a detective to follow up on them. In June of 2002, the resident deputy suspected of wrongdoing and 5 other deputies filed a complaint against Hager, claiming that he had used falsified documents and warrants to defame the resident deputy during his time on the task force. Within a week, the department concluded that all of the witnesses Hager had identified, who had been vetted by the DEA and were being used in federal court cases, were all unreliable, and that John Aujay had taken his own life because of his marital problems. Hager was reassigned while he was investigated by Internal Affairs for the next 11 months. At the end of the investigation, Hager faced 2 charges: falsifying information and conducting a personnel investigation of the resident deputy. The first charge was based on errors in summaries Hager had not written. The standard punishment for these offenses, under the disciplinary guidelines of the department, was a 15-day suspension. Instead, Hager was fired, despite having been rated as outstanding during his 3 previous performance reviews with the department. Hager could not find work due to the nature of these charges, and eventually filed for bankruptcy protection. He filed a wrongful termination lawsuit against both Los Angeles County and the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, alleging that his termination was whistleblower retaliation. A jury awarded him $4.5 million in lost earnings and damages. The county and department appealed the judgment for the following 3 years, but eventually had to pay Hager $2.5 million plus interest, which made his final payout around $3 million. Hager, no longer feeling safe within the jurisdiction of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, has since moved out of the area. In 2015, John's wife Deborah was homeless and living in her car, supporting herself with only a $950 a month disability check she receives because she cannot work due to an extreme form of obsessive-compulsive disorder. And his daughter Chloe was living in Los Angeles with her boyfriend and his mother. In March of 2020, a woman named Chloe Aujay, who was the same age as John's daughter, passed away in Idaho, although it is unconfirmed if this woman was in fact John's daughter or just another woman with the same name. In the more than 20 years since John disappeared, no sign of him or his remains has ever been found.